Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into a really fascinating and honestly quite provocative essay by Zhu Feng today. It's called Sexual Freedom as Primary and Ultimate Freedom. Now, before we even touch the core subject of that title, we need to lay down a foundational framework, and it starts with a universal truth that literally every single one of us can relate to: our deep, innate, almost unquenchable desire for liberty. We all just want to be free, right? But what does that actually look like in practice? And where does that pursuit ultimately lead us? Let's get into it. The author makes a pretty bold claim right off the bat. Freedom is life's absolute ultimate goal. It's a concept so universally understood that it's literally the bedrock of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But Zhu Feng takes it further. He argues that freedom is way more precious than any of those material things we're usually chasing. I mean, think about someone who's locked up. They aren't dreaming about getting a promotion or buying a luxury car or wearing designer clothes. No way. They just want their liberty. The whole reason the idea of slavery is so universally abhorrent is simply because it's the total, absolute absence of this fundamental, natural right.
And this actually scales all the way up to our biggest spiritual mythologies. Like, why are people so universally terrified of the concept of hell? Well, according to this framework, it's because hell represents a state of absolutely zero freedom, period. And on the flip side, why is heaven always the ultimate goal? Because heaven is total, uninhibited freedom. It's the ultimate exertion of your own will without hitting any walls or boundaries. So this isn't just some physical desire. It's a deeply ingrained spiritual yearning that pretty much dictates human behavior.
But let's bring it back down to earth for a second and look at reality. We don't live in heaven, right? We live in human society. And Zhu Feng uses this really powerful metaphor here. He says that as individuals, we're essentially just single drops of water in a massive ocean. So absolute freedom in this environment, it's literally impossible. Think about it. If every single person fully exerted their own will all the time, our wills would constantly be colliding. Your ultimate freedom would probably step right on top of mine. So true, uninhibited liberty just absolutely does not work in a shared world. To keep things from descending into total chaos, we have to accept some pretty strict boundaries. This is exactly why we have constitutions and laws. They protect our baseline freedoms by putting a hard stop on what we cannot do. Because, ironically, absolute freedom would mean having the freedom to burn, kill, rob, deceive, and hurt others. And since those actions completely destroy society and trample on other people's rights, they have to be strictly forbidden. In a functioning society, if you want to pursue freedom, you actually have to absolutely restrain those destructive behaviors. Okay, so what does that actually leave us with? Well, we can only pursue liberties that don't violently clash with society or with nature. And the essay lays out a really fascinating list of allowed freedoms. We've got the freedom to migrate and move around, the freedom of imagination and thought, the pursuit of heaven, and the freedom to labor and create. But it's the final item on this list that the author zeroes in on as the absolute most vital one of all, and that is sexual freedom. And here is where we hit the central, highly provocative thesis of the whole essay. Zhu Feng argues that among all of those allowed freedoms we just talked about, sexual freedom is the primary absolute core. And he makes a really bold claim here. Without it, all those other freedoms are basically just illusions. They're fleeting, they're unreal, and they don't actually satisfy our deep craving for liberty. Compared to this central core, everything else on that list is just marginal. If you're genuinely pursuing freedom, the author argues that this is the very first one you have to prioritize. Now, to really grasp this, we need to completely rewire how we define the term. In modern society, when we hear sexual freedom, we almost instantly just think about the physical act. But Zhu Feng is asking us to look at this from a deeply philosophical angle. In this framework, true sexual freedom actually means existing and living fully according to the Creator's intention. It's about pure, unfiltered, natural expression. We're not supposed to narrowly restrict it to just physical intercourse. It's really about having the ability to live entirely in sync with the way of nature. To back this up, the text actually pulls in some heavy spiritual wisdom, referencing Master Bodhidharma's Bloodstream sermon. He explicitly connects nature directly with Buddha. The idea here is that using our natural faculties exactly as they were intended is the absolute truest expression of freedom. For example, your eyes are made for seeing, so restricting them is a literal loss of liberty. If you want to sing but you're silenced, you're stripped of your freedom. Following that exact same logic, the essay argues that reproductive organs aren't just strictly for procreation or excretion, but for the natural enjoyment of pleasure. And if you restrict that natural enjoyment, you're actually restricting human nature itself. Now, I know what you might be thinking. For a lot of people, this topic immediately triggers thoughts of wild promiscuity, lewdness, or just total debauchery. But the author draws a really sharp, distinct line here. He actually described the framing of this freedom as mere lewdness as a savage misunderstanding. It's basically the expectation of a brutish nature. For the civilized mind, however, it's defined completely differently. It's seen as the artistic blooming and enjoyment of human nature. It's framed as this very elegant expression of life and an appreciation of beauty, rather than just some chaotic, base scramble.
But you're probably wondering, what about the societal risks? What about disease or the breakdown of families? Well, the essay uses this brilliant airplane analogy to break it down. Think about it. Airplane crashes are absolutely devastating, right? But we don't just outright ban flying because a plane might crash. We don't throw away the entire concept of air travel because of the inherent risks. In this framework, blaming diseases or broken homes directly on the freedom to express oneself is kind of like blaming a disease on food itself. It just doesn't make logical sense to ban an essential core freedom just because there are hazards associated with it.
And what's wild is that this philosophy doesn't just stop at human society, it expands out onto a massive cosmic scale. The core argument here is that our degree of freedom directly correlates with our quality of life. So essentially, the higher the quality of the life form, the greater the degree of freedom it naturally possesses. The ability to express your true natural self without any restrictions literally becomes the absolute measuring stick for how advanced the life form is in the grand scheme of the universe. So, when we look at nature, we basically see this ascending ladder of existence. Right at the base, you have plants, which obviously have very limited freedom. Then animals. They can move around freely, so they're freer than plants. Then you step up to humans, who are freer than animals. But here's the kicker. We aren't at the top. According to this text, celestials and Buddhas operate on an even higher quality of life, making them freer than us. And at the absolute pinnacle of this ladder, gods. They possess ultimate, completely unrestricted freedom. Basically, freedom is the ladder that every single life form in the universe is trying to climb.
But wait, because there is a massive, massive catch for us humans here. You can't just wake up tomorrow and decide to live in total, unrestricted natural freedom. True sexual freedom, which again is this ultimate expression of existing perfectly as intended, actually requires you to completely perfect your soul garden. You have to cultivate a very specific set of high-level virtues: sincerity, kindness, beauty, love, faith, and honesty. If you haven't put in the grueling work to cultivate this internal garden, the text argues that you are absolutely blocked from enjoying this upper tier of freedom.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty mind-bending provocation to wrap this up. Because of our inherent human flaws, it turns out that human beings, by definition, can't actually fully enjoy this ultimate freedom. We are still on the ladder, still climbing. So, if you're sitting there believing that you have totally perfected your soul garden and you're already living in a state of absolute, harmonious natural freedom, well, congratulations. You might actually no longer be a human being at all. You may have already elevated to the status of a celestial. It definitely makes you evaluate exactly where you stand on that cosmic ladder, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this one today. Keep questioning everything, and I will see you in the next explainer.